Ready for a deep dive, folks? Today, we're going way back to the medieval period in Europe.
Ooh!
We're going to be talking all about the punishments that were used back then.
I am ready.
Yeah, we've got a whole bunch of sources that detail just how brutal things were.
Wow.
So yeah, buckle up.
Okay, so when we think about medieval times, we often picture knights and chivalry and all that romantic stuff.
Right, exactly.
But the reality for a lot of people was way harsher, way more violent.
For sure. And what's really interesting is how punishment was used not just to deal with crime,
Yeah.
but also as like a public spectacle.
Yeah.
You know, a way to scare people and keep them in line.
Absolutely. It was all about power and control.
Exactly. Like take the Judas Cradle, for example.
Ah.
This thing, it was basically a pyramid-shaped seat designed to slowly stretch and tear a person's body using their own weight.
Oh my gosh.
Just awful.
That's a chilling example. It really shows how calculated these punishments were.
Right.
Even the name, the Judas Cradle, it's like a psychological torture on top of the physical pain.
Yeah. Invoking betrayal and all that.
Exactly. It's a reminder that punishment in medieval Europe wasn't just about inflicting pain, but about breaking someone's spirit completely.
It's wild how much thought went into making these punishments terrifying and symbolic.
It really is.
Makes you realize how different their view of the world was from ours.
For sure.
Speaking of brutal, another method that gets me is the saw torture.
Oh yeah, that one's as straightforwardly brutal as it sounds.
I know the name says it all.
Yeah, basically they'd hang the person upside down.
Oh, God.
They saw them in half, sometimes lengthwise, sometimes across the body, and get this hanging them upside down kept them conscious longer,
Oh, no.
so they suffered more.
That is barbaric. It's hard to believe people could do that to each other.
It's tough to stomach.
And the worst part is it wasn't just about punishing the individual.
Yeah,
They wanted to send a message to the whole community.
exactly. It was a power move,
Yeah.
showing everyone what happens if you disobey.
It would have been terrifying to witness something like that.
Absolutely. Imagine seeing that in the public square, all the sights and sounds and smells.
I can't even imagine.
It would have been traumatic, and that was the point, to scare people into submission.
So basically, a society ruled by fear.
Pretty much.
And speaking of fear,
Mm.
let's talk about rat torture.
Ooh, okay, that one plays on a whole other level of terror.
I know, it's just messed up.
So they would restrain the person and put a cage of starving rats on their stomach,
No way.
and then they would heat the cage.
Oh, God.
So the rats, desperate to escape the heat, would burrow into the person's flesh.
Oof, that's horrific being eaten alive. I can't even...
It's a truly awful thought, the terror the person must felt.
They were trying to break them physically and mentally.
Absolutely. Medieval punishments often targeted both the body and the mind,
Makes sense.
using pain, psychological manipulation, and public shame all at once.
Wow.
Their idea of justice was all about revenge and deterrence, not about rehabilitation like we think of it today.
Right, it was a completely different mindset.
For sure. And it's important to remember it wasn't just men who suffered these punishments.
Right, of course.
Women often faced punishments specifically designed for them, reflecting the patriarchal values of the time.
Ugh, that's so disturbing to think about.
Yeah, take the breast ripper, for example.
Okay, I gotta ask, what was that? The name itself is just horrifying.
It was as awful as it sounds. Basically, it was a tool used to tear a woman's breasts from her body.
Oh my God, that's just barbaric.
It was often used on women accused of adultery, heresy, witchcraft, things like that.
So they were targeting a part of the body associated with femininity and motherhood.
Exactly. It was a way to control and punish women specifically.
That's just sick. It shows how intertwined justice was with social hierarchies and power dynamics.
For sure, it wasn't just about right and wrong, it was about who had the power.
Were there any other punishments that targeted specific groups or offenses?
Oh, absolutely. The pear of anguish, for example.
Okay, that sounds terrible just from the name.
Yeah, it was a pear-shaped device that they would insert into various orifices of the body. Oh my God.
And then expand it, causing excruciating pain and mutilation.
That's just inhumane. It's hard to believe they actually did that to people.
It was used on both men and women for things like blasphemy, heresy, even homosexuality.
So again, targeting specific groups and beliefs.
Exactly. It was about punishing those who didn't conform to the accepted norms.
It's like they're trying to erase any form of dissent or difference.
Yeah, pretty much. And the level of cruelty is just mind-boggling.
It really is. Did social status play a role in all of this?
Absolutely. Nobles and commoners were treated very differently.
Makes sense. I guess the punishments were tailored to their place in society?
Right, like a noble might get fined or exiled for something that would earn a commoner, a public flogging, or even worse.
So justice was basically just another way to reinforce existing power structures.
Pretty much, it was about maintaining the status quo.
We've talked about punishments designed to inflict pain, but what about humiliation and shame?
Public humiliation was a big part of medieval punishment.
Makes sense. In a way, it's like a deterrent for others. Exactly one example is coffin torture.
Okay, I've never heard of that one. What was it?
They would lock the person inside a cage or a coffin, sometimes even suspended in a public place.
Oh, wow, so everyone could see them.
Exactly. They were exposed to the elements mocked by passersby, often left to die from starvation or dehydration.
That's just cruel and unusual punishment.
It was meant to be a spectacle, a warning to others.
And the psychological impact must have been devastating, being subjected to that kind of public shame.
It was a way of breaking someone completely, not just physically, but socially.
Did everyone support these practices? I mean, were there any voices of dissent?
That's a tough question. There are records of people protesting against particularly cruel punishments.
So there was some awareness of the inhumanity.
Yeah, but there's also evidence that many people saw these public displays as necessary to keep order.
It's like a paradox, right? They wanted safety and stability, but achieved it through fear and violence.
Exactly. It was a time of great uncertainty. People were looking for something to hold on to, even if it was brutal and unfair.
So it's hard to judge them by our standards, I guess.
Right. Their world was so different from ours. They faced challenges and fears we can't even imagine.
Still, it's difficult to reconcile their methods with our ideas about human rights.
Absolutely. But understanding the context helps us see how their worldview led to these practices.
It's all about perspective, right?
Yeah.
We can learn from the past, even if it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. By studying history, we can avoid repeating the mistakes and appreciate how far we've come.
So did anyone ever question the effectiveness of these punishments? I mean, did it actually work?
Well, there's no evidence of any widespread organized opposition.
So people mostly accepted it as the norm.
Yeah, but some scholars and religious figures did argue against the excessive cruelty.
Interesting. So there were at least some voices questioning the system.
They argued that it was not only inhumane, but also counterproductive.
Makes sense. It's like a vicious cycle. The more brutal the punishment, the more desensitized people become.
Exactly, and that could lead to even more violence.
So they were trapped in a system that perpetuated fear and suffering.
Pretty much, and it's important to remember that the impact of these punishments extended far beyond the individual.
You're right. We haven't talked about the families and communities of the victims. It's true, we haven't really thought about that side of it.
Yeah, the impact on families and communities was huge.
Imagine the shame and the fear, the grief.
Absolutely, and not just for the immediate family.
Right, the whole community would be affected.
Living with that constant reminder, of what happens if you step out of line.
So it was about controlling everyone, really.
Yeah, they were trying to shape the whole society's way of thinking.
Using fear as a tool.
Exactly, a very effective tool, unfortunately.
So in a way, they created a society that was afraid to speak out.
Yeah, a culture of silence.
It's a sad reality.
But like we said, even in those dark times, there were people who questioned these practices.
Yeah, so what eventually changed things? Why did we move away from these brutal punishments?
It was a slow process. Lots of factors contributed.
Okay, so what were some of the big ones?
Well, the Enlightenment played a big role.
Right, with its focus on reason and individual rights.
Exactly. People started to see things differently.
They began to question the old ways.
And reformers started advocating for more humane treatment of prisoners.
So a shift from pure punishment to rehabilitation.
Right, the idea that people could change.
It's amazing how much our understanding of justice has evolved.
It really is, and it's still evolving even today.
Yeah, we're still figuring things out.
Absolutely. But the medieval period serves as a stark warning,
Of what happens when power goes unchecked.
Exactly, and it reminds us of the importance of protecting human dignity.
Well, this has been a really intense deep dive.
It has. We've gone in deep into some dark corners of history.
But we've learned a lot about medieval punishments and how they reflect the society of the time.
Yeah, and by understanding the past, we can better understand ourselves.
And work towards a more just and compassionate future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you all.
And remember, the lessons we've learned from the past can help us build a better future.
Here's to progress and understanding.
Cheers to that.